Welcome to DrJLT Economics. I'm Dr. DrJLT. In today's episode, I want to talk about the European Union because I think that this coming decade, in fact this decade, is going to be a decade of stagnation across the EU. I'm going to present three main causes, and in fact these three causes are the three main malaises that have plagued the European Union. And they are not really some of the very new ideas, but I think to consolidate them together and to present them clearly will have some value to my listeners. The first of these three is the distortion of market signals that the European Union and in fact a lot of European countries independently of the EU have caused. And by this I mean the distortion of market signals not only in the financial markets but also in the labor markets and in manufacturing and services. Let me give you some examples. In the labor market, European Union tend to have some of the strictest worker protection programs, and they tend to have some of the most robust social security programs. But these programs, while they provide benefits for the workers, and I'm not here to say that it is absolutely horrible to have them, but from a efficiency point of view, from the point of view of productivity, these are pretty bad ideas to be implemented at this level, because they make it very difficult for companies for inefficient companies to become efficient companies. It is very difficult for companies to basically for economic resources to be reallocated. It's very difficult for large corporations to fail. They are protected from failing, and all these things together end up having the effect of having a standard of causing in the mid to long term stagnating standard of living, as we have already observed in the past, I would say half century. Across the EU nations, especially the ones who have the best labor protection and protection against big companies going bankrupt, what happened is that like Italy, France, these countries are plagued by zombie companies, big zombie companies that take up all the spaces, that make it very difficult for new companies to emerge. And the mid to long term effect is that living standards don't rise. Of course, it prevents on the individual level from any employee or any worker from suffering short-term miseries, but I think on a societal level, this is an inefficient suboptimal solution. And on manufacturing and services, we can see, for example, a lot of huge number of regulations are issued by the EU. An example could be with cars. Across the European Union, in fact, diesel vehicles are some of the most common private personal cars, small cars, and those are some of the most polluting ones, right? Diesel engines are not attuned for being installed in small cars that are driven short distances. They are best as truck engines or marine engines. They're not good for private small cars because Small cars are driven short distances. They are driven in towns. And so all those local pollutions, and especially pollution before the engine is warmed up, will all be just breathed in by the population. And all these significant blunders that actually endanger people, that bring no benefit at all, only make the European Union less competitive, less efficient. That's another example of the distortion of market signals. And thirdly, of course, I also talked about the distortion of market signal in financial markets, mostly in the last decade in particular. In the beginning, they were resisting, I think, just a decade ago, the European Union in the beginning, they were more responsible than the United States. But then they started to cut interest rate to negative. They did QE in competition with the United States. And all this happens is that a lot of the bad decisions that would not have been made in business are made. A lot of companies that should go bankrupt are not going bankrupt. And the same things happen again and again. And that's a distortion of market signal. They talk a lot, just alongside the United States, about free market capitalism, free market. That is the hugest, biggest, just a load of bullshit, complete bullshit. Because within the European Union, there is no free market. And you can hardly call it capitalism either. It is corporatism. It is big government corporatism, and there is hardly any freedom in the economic sphere. The second main reason that the EU is going to underperform and is going to enter a decade of stagnation is a couple of things, basically two sides of the same coin, you could say, about the finances. It's a combination of irresponsible fiscal policies and the poorly conceived Eurozone project. To say some countries have, individual countries have irresponsible fiscal policies, well, that could be just a national issue. It only endangers that would have endangered only the economy of a single country. But with with poorly conceived Eurozone, which is a monetary union without any fiscal there are some general guidelines of fiscal policies that nobody abides by. Nobody abides by those general guidelines. And at the same time, there is no coordinated fiscal policy. There is no common budget. And so what you end up with is severe, a prime example of moral hazard. If you take a class of economics and your professor asks you to present an example of moral hazard, just point to the European Union and the Eurozone, and that is moral hazard because you cramped together countries with different economic backgrounds that are in need of different monetary policies, right? And then you at the same time force them to have the same monetary policy because it takes their power of making that monetary policy away from them. So what you end up with is that is to have even more irresponsible fiscal policy that the consequences of which is borne by every other nation within the Eurozone. And since that is the case, that being the case, why would you not be irresponsible fiscally. And that is also the reason why almost no country within the Eurozone has been fiscally responsible. They have always been spending beyond their means. And of course, with the dawn of quantitative easing, there is even less reason to not spend that money that's printed. Just print some money for us, and we're gonna just spend it for you, right? This is a prime example of moral hazard. And another, beyond this moral hazard, just the structural problem of the Eurozone also causes another issue, which is that, as I mentioned, different countries have different economic foundations. They have different situations, and they can, within their own country, experience different somewhat different economic cycles, right? Because they focus on different industries, because these are small countries, right? Some country can be focused on a certain type of industries, such as tourism and shipping. I'm thinking of some southern European country. And this will be quite different than a export driven economy that focuses a lot on automobiles. Now, this would mean that these countries can experience different economic cycles. And what this means is that the monetary policies should, in an ideal world, should expand or contract in response to this, to basically ensure that when there is a deflationary event, that the effects are not borne so severely by the population, and it could end quickly. And when there is some overheating in the economy, there could be sufficient control and immediate control over this overheating and bring inflation down. So this basically, this power is taken away by the Eurozone. And what you end up with is a lopsided situation where when a country is entering a sort of deflationary situation, another country's economy is heating up, what happens is that the euro just goes from one country to the other, and the hot money, and start speculating and bring up a lot of debt. And this, of course, causes systemic risk across the Eurozone. And this is Eurozone's sovereign debt crisis, the euro crisis. And this type of crisis will continue to happen, and they will never stop until either the European Union becomes a federalized country, or when the Eurozone simply adopts a common budget, or the Eurozone completely collapses, and the European Union goes with it. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that, that's the reason that has been talked about the most. Everyone who has been criticizing the European Union has been talking about it, so I'm not going to cover it a lot, but I'm just briefly going to mention it, which is the most wasteful overhead. The compliance costs, the bureaucracies, the layers of officials, just unbelievable. How can there be so many officials for countries that are not that big, right? France spends, I think, the government spends over 50% of its GDP. How the fuck is that going to? That's just a big overhead. And what's happening? What's the result of that? The result of that is inefficiency. So you have a distortion of market signals that make free market capitalism very impossible to function. You have irresponsible fiscal policies, and in combination with a poorly constructed Eurozone that is designed to fail. And then you bring on top of that huge bureaucracy and inefficiency. So altogether, these means that, in fact, ever since the introduction of the euro, the European economy has been in question. Some countries has been in dire straits ever since about 2000, when there was basically Italy and I think Greece. They have always had problems. Now we are seeing France. I think in the last decade, France has had continual problems. Spain, they have problems, and I think very likely even in more robust, comparatively robust European economies going into this decade, they are going to suffer more and more because of these three things that are equally applicable to all of them. So, of course, you could argue for the second point, which was poorly designed Eurozone. You could argue, in fact, it is correct that in the short term, it has benefited some countries, like the Netherlands, and Germany. They have benefited from this poorly designed Eurozone. But at the same time, they still suffer from the first and the third points. And so with the complete economic disaster of the pandemic, I think going forward, it is very difficult for me to see a scenario where the European Union does not end up with a decade of stagnation. And that is if they take the right measures to deal with it. And in the next video, I think I will talk about some of the measures that I think might be adopted to alleviate the situation and make sure that the stagnation only lasts a single decade. But if they continue with on the path of quantitative easing, if they continue to build up the inefficiencies in the bureaucracy, if they continue to worsen the distortion of market signals in the labor markets, in the manufacturing sector, in the financial markets, and if they don't go ahead and address the imbalances in the Eurozone, what's going to happen is that they're going to end up with more than a decade of stagnation. The European Union can very well fall apart. And of course, I'm just saying this, and I think the same argument has been made, at least, but perhaps not all three of them together, but I think a lot of the ideas have been talked about in the Brexit campaign as a reason why Britain needed to leave the European Union. I think, of course, a lot of the voters who voted for Brexit were not voting on these sound economic analysis. They probably were thinking more about, racism. They don't like the Slavs and things like that. But some of these points have been made, and some of these points, when they are made, they were valid. The problem was, of course, when a lot of people who have been anti-EU, who wanted to have ulterior political motives, want to talk down the EU. They raise these points, so they actually discredit these points. But these are valid arguments, and these are the very arguments I believe that will cause the European Union a decade of stagnation. All right, thank you very much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can follow me on Twitter at DrJLT. You can also find my website DrJLT.com and newfiliac.com. NEOFILIAC.com. Thank you.